So most people don't know me that well, so I like to talk about what brought me to running for president. I was certainly not someone who ever thought I would run for president. I grew up the son of immigrants in this country. My parents told me, get good grades, get a good job, so I tried to do that. I started a business that flopped, but I kept with it. I became the head of an education company that grew to become #1 in the US and was bought by a public company in 2009. And 2009 was a very tough time in so much of the country where the financial crisis had done a number on communities everywhere. And I thought I had some insight as to why our economy had tanked. It was in large part because so many of the people I'd gone to college and law school with had went straight to Wall Street and helped create mortgage-backed securities and financial derivatives and things that tanked the economy. So I thought that was a train wreck. How many of you all work in nonprofits? How many of you all volunteer for a nonprofit? You should raise your hand to that second one. That was pretty much like, are you a nice person sort of thing, and then it's like, yes, I too am nice. So I went to my wife, said, hey, I'd like to start a nonprofit that's going to train entrepreneurs and create thousands of jobs around the country, and that's what I did for the last 7 years. So that's me with President Obama. My wife got to meet the president too, so my in-laws were very excited about me that week. We helped create several thousand jobs throughout the Midwest and the South primarily, in cities like Cleveland, St. Louis, Detroit, Birmingham, Baltimore, many places I'd never been before. And during this time, I saw that unfortunately the water level was going down, not up, in many communities. And I also saw firsthand the gulf between different parts of the country, where if you flew between St. Louis and San Francisco or Michigan and Manhattan, you feel like you were crossing dimensions and decades and even ways of life, not just going a few time zones. But I was still stunned when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. You all remember that night well. How did you react when he won? Shock, tears. Someone said at another event, bourbon. Yeah, it was a shock to me too. It was a giant red flag that tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star as our president. That's not business as usual. But even if you were sad or dismayed, we all have family members and friends and neighbors who celebrated his victory. And I know that's true here in Iowa because Donald Trump won Iowa by more than 8 points, despite this being a very purple state. So if you were to turn on cable news and ask why did Donald Trump win that night, why would you think that he won? What are the reasons that we've been presented? Russia, racism, not a politician, Hillary Clinton, fear, emails, electoral college, FBI, Facebook, media, all sort of mixed together. But I'm a numbers guy. I went looking through the numbers for an answer, and I found it. And I'm going to present it to you right now. All right, so first I want to give us a bit of a backdrop as to what our economy looks like. I'm going to show you all the most common jobs in the US economy just by category. So they are office and administrative work, makes sense, retail and sales, food service and food preparation, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. So these 5 job categories comprise almost half of all American jobs. Now, what do these jobs have in common, among other things? And if you've been keeping up with me in the campaign, you know the big themes of the campaign is that technology is transforming our way of life. So what effect is technology having on these jobs, the most common in our country? Yeah, they're getting automated away progressively. So we have some fun animations that illustrate some of these things that you've all seen and worked with and are very familiar with. This one I resent because I'm really bad at it. It always takes me like an extra 3 or 4 seconds to find the barcode. It's like, oh my gosh, where's the person when you need them? This is a robot pizza printer. They can produce pizzas just the same and delicious every single time, more quickly and inexpensively. A robot truck you've all heard of. A robot truck just transported 20 tons of butter from California to Pennsylvania with no human intervention 2 weeks ago. Why butter? I have no idea. And then this is manufacturing lines. So these are all things that we've seen in some measure. Now, what are the numbers around these trends? If you look at the impact on our workforce of the automation of the most common jobs in our economy, it is going to hit about 2.5 million jobs annually, which is several times the rate of any previous change that has come before. The White House estimated that 80% or more of the jobs that make $20 an hour or less are at least potentially subject to automation over this period of time. So this is the greatest transformation in our economy in our history, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. How many of you have heard the words fourth industrial revolution before from a politician? This was the first time, right? And I'm barely a politician, Iowa. I'm an entrepreneur who was getting credit for creating thousands of jobs, and I realized that my work was like pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom, and that the water was rushing out much more than it was being replenished. That water rushing out helped get Donald Trump elected, and now it's going to do more and more. So I talked about the robot trucks a little bit. Most people do not realize that trucking is the most common job in 29 states. There are 3.5 million truck drivers in this country, average age 49, 94% men. So if my friends in California are successful in getting robot trucks on the roads, what is that going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million Americans who work at truck stops, motels, and diners around the country that rely upon the truckers getting out and having a meal? How many of you have been to Iowa 80 in Davenport? Yeah, they've got a very reasonably priced buffet. They say that 5,000 people stop there every day. How many people will stop there if the trucks no longer have drivers? You can think about our highway system as a circulatory system, and the trucks are like blood cells. They're carrying cargo, yes, but they're also carrying economic vitality because the drivers get out every single day and shower and eat and sleep and live. Almost 10% of the jobs in the state of Nebraska support truckers. What will happen to those jobs in Nebraska when the trucks no longer need to stop in Nebraska? So this is the impact that's coming down the pike. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in Ames? And why are those stores closing? Amazon. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in business every single year. How much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That is your math, Ames. 20 billion out, 30% of your stores and malls closed for good, you get zero back. This map that's up there, all those pins are major department stores that are set to close. How many of you have been to a ghost mall that has lost its anchor stores? How many of you would go back to that mall? Those malls get spookier and more eerie as they empty out. They go from having a lot of positive value to actually being sources of blight very, very quickly. We're doing that to 30% of the country's malls. And if you can imagine what those properties will look like in the years to come, that is what's coming, and we are going to get zero back in return. The most common job in the economy is retail clerk. The average retail clerk is a 39-year-old woman making between $8 and $12 an hour. What is her next job going to be when the store or mall closes? No one is sure. So these are the big changes that we can see. This one we can see around us right now. One of the examples I use for artificial intelligence is when you all call the customer service line of a big company and you get the software or bot on the other side. I'm sure you do the same thing I do, which is you pound 000, human, representative, and just keep saying that word over and over again until you get someone on the line, right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. Oh yeah, I do that too. That software is miserable. As soon as you hear it, you're like, please let this company still employ a human being. I'm going to find that human being right now. But in 2 or 3 short years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, peppy. You might not even know it's software. That is what artificial intelligence will actually mean in our lives. Because you don't even need artificial general intelligence to have software that can take the job of that call center worker. You just need a very good decision tree and thousands of voice prompts and software that can detect changes in our tones of voice so they know when we're getting annoyed, and then they can switch gears. AI is getting smarter and stronger all the time. This is an oversimplification. This is just showing the exponential growth of Moore's law, but this is not that far off as to what AI is going to be capable of. The quote on the slide is, "AI is the new electricity," which is a quote from a Stanford professor. That's what they're doing right now. And how many people do you know who get smarter like that? Maybe your 12-month-old. Because they can actually start doing things in a particular day. But most of us do not actually ramp up in that direction. So what will the effect of artificial intelligence be on various jobs? I was talking about the most common jobs in our economy, which are retail clerks and call center workers and truck drivers. But this is going to touch many jobs that require high levels of education, because many of these jobs are actually very rules-based, and you can program machines and software to tell you what to do. Radiologists already cannot compete with artificial intelligence software that can see shades of gray on a film that the human eye cannot, and can reference millions of films rather than hundreds or thousands. This is a picture of a robot pharmacist. It turns out being a pharmacist involves a lot of trying to monitor drug interactions and data, and then figuring out what to dispense. I was an attorney for 5 months, which is long enough to know that you can automate away a lot of that job. And that's half a joke, but it's very real. Software can edit contracts more cheaply and effectively and accurately than any human lawyer can if you were looking at a volume of documents. So this is a problem that's going to affect everyone pretty quickly. And it's already transforming certain industries like finance and insurance, who are replacing workers right now. I spoke to a group of 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked them, how many of you are looking at replacing your back office clerical workers with artificial intelligence and software? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. The fact is, you could fire whoever didn't have their hand up, because their incentives are all around improving their bottom line. So if someone comes to them and says, hey, you can get rid of some of your workers and replace them with software, you have to do that or you'll be fired. That is the system that we have built. Our system is built around capital efficiency for these publicly traded companies. It is not built around our well-being. It is not built around our quality of life. That's why we feel the way we do. Now back to the original question, why the heck did Donald Trump win Iowa by 8 or more points? How did he win Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, all places that have traditionally been battleground or swing states? You had this entire series of explanations from the news networks, but I went through the numbers, and the numbers tell a very clear story. The reason why Donald Trump's our president today is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs over the last number of years. And where were those jobs? Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and 40,000 right here in Iowa. I have been to the towns that have lost their manufacturing jobs here in Iowa, and after the plant closed, the shopping center closed, and then people left, and then the school shrank, and then that town has never recovered. I have seen the same thing play out in towns in Missouri, Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Michigan. How many of you studied economics in college? Maybe you're studying now. Some of you might be students. So according to classical economic theory, what would happen to these 4 million workers who lost their manufacturing jobs? What's their next move, according to our textbook? They get retrained, moved, and find new jobs. Maybe they became coders. You can sense where I'm going with this. So if you actually try and find what happened to those manufacturing workers, it turns out that many of them, even most of them, left the workforce. This curve is the labor force participation rate in the United States. And you can see around the time that manufacturing employment went off a cliff, so did workforce participation. It turns out that almost half the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs never worked again. And that shows up in the numbers. So how did these workers survive? They filed for disability. The black line is the disability rate, which went up and up at the same time that we were laying off all of these manufacturing workers. The gray curve is the ratio of employed to working age population, which obviously went down in the exact opposite direction. So again, we blast away 4 million manufacturing jobs in the swing states. Half of them, or almost half, do not work again. They filed for disability. You then see surges in certain other numbers, like you see a spike here in the proportion of American children who are born to single moms. Right now it's about 40% in the US. You can see that also started to rise around this time. Studies have shown that when people lose their jobs, they get married at lower rates. Almost 2/3 of the manufacturing workers were men. So if you can see this playing out, as men lost their jobs, people get married at lower rates, but they still occasionally have children. You then also saw a surge in suicides and drug and deaths of despair, to the point where now America's life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row. So that is the blue line. If you see these other lines, they are all other developed countries. So as you can see, which direction are the other lines going? Down. That's normal in a developed country. In a developed country, ordinarily you're getting richer, stronger, healthier, and people are not killing themselves at higher rates. In the United States of America, we have had record levels of suicides and drug overdoses that are so unprecedented that America's overall life expectancy has now declined for the last 3 years in a row. You know the last time America's life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row? Great Depression is a great guess. It's even earlier than that. It's the Spanish flu of 1918, a global pandemic that killed millions. That is the last time it happened in America, and it's happening now. This is not what the cable news networks are presenting as the reason why Donald Trump won, but I'm a numbers guy, and I find the numbers much more convincing than the working backwards rationale that the talking heads are using. They're trying to back into the numbers. Why not just use the numbers? You also saw surges in anxiety, depression, mental health problems, prescription drugs. We have a mental health crisis in this country that is also unprecedented. So to review, you have record high levels of corporate profits and GDP, but you also have record high levels of anxiety, depression, financial insecurity, dislocated workers, suicides and drug overdoses. So if your corporate profits are going up and your life expectancy is going down, which do you listen to? We know which one Washington, D.C. is listening to. They can't see past the dollar signs. They're not paying attention to people and life expectancy. Washington, D.C. today is the richest city in our country. What do they produce? This is, no one knows. And yet business is awfully good. So these are some of the disconnects that have led to Donald Trump being our president. The disconnects and the problems are actually real. Donald Trump's our president today because he had a very simple message. He said he was going to make America great again. What did Hillary Clinton say in response? America's already great. Remember that? It's been a long 3 years, Ames, I know. But we're going to end it together in a little less than 3 weeks. Hillary's response did not go over well because the problems are real. They do exist. We have to acknowledge their depth and severity and reality, but then we need actual solutions that will move the country forward. What were Donald Trump's solutions? Build a wall, turn the clock back, bring the old jobs back. Ames, you know we have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society to rise to the real challenges of the 21st century. We have to evolve in the way we see ourselves and our work and our value. I'm the ideal candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. You may not know this if you're new, but math is an acronym. And what does it stand for? Make America think harder. That's right. That's your job in 20 short days. So how are we going to actually move the country forward? If you're here today, at some point you heard that someone's running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. How many know that? Yes, and I do. And that's what we have to do to actually start moving these things in the right direction. So what I'm saying we have to do is distribute the gains from the Amazons and Googles and the AI companies of the world to you all, to your families, to your communities. Build a trickle-up economy from our people, our families, and our communities up. $1,000 a month in your hands would be a game changer for millions of families right here in the state. Particularly because in the trickle-up economy, when the money is in your hands, where will it go? How would you spend it? How much of it would stay right here in Iowa? Most of it, not all of it. You might get your own Netflix password. But most of it would go to car repairs you've been putting off, and daycare expenses, and Little League signups, and local nonprofits, and religious organizations, and to arts, and creativity, and culture, and entrepreneurship. And I know how necessary this is in part because of my own family. My wife is at home with our 2 boys every day, one of whom is autistic. How much is her work included in our economic measures? 0. That gets a 0. And it's not just her and Kyle and all the caregivers who are taking care of ailing loved ones, or all of the volunteers and activists in our communities who are doing it out of love, or the coaches and mentors who are trying to make people stronger. How much do they all get valued at? 0 or near 0, again and again. 98% of artists, 0 or near 0. Local journalists, more and more. We put 2,000 local newspapers out of business over the last number of months because all their revenue went up to the internet. You know what doesn't function as well without local news? Democracy. How the heck can you vote on what's going on in your community if you don't get any information about it? These are the things that we claim to value more highly than anything else. Our families, our communities, our democracy, but we're allowing them to get zeroed out one by one by one. And that's what the freedom dividend changes. The freedom dividend makes the case to our fellow Americans that we all have intrinsic value as people, as citizens, as human beings. We have to disentangle this confusion that economic value and human value are the same things, because they are not. What do you say? Is that true? Yeah. That is the message that we have to take in 20 days. This $1,000 a month lays a foundation that makes us all more able to adapt in unprecedented times of change, which is right now. And then we need to measure our economy by things that would actually tell us how we are doing. Even the inventor of GDP said 100 years ago, this is a terrible measurement of national well-being, we should never use it as that. And here we are 100 years later, riding it off a cliff. Robot trucks will be great for both corporate profits and GDP. They'll be terrible for many, many Americans. So instead of GDP, we should be measuring our well-being through our own well-being. Health and life expectancy, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, childhood success rates, clean air and clean water, how our kids are doing. These are the real measurements of our country. I will modernize GDP to include these things, and I will present them to you all each year at the State of the Union in a PowerPoint deck. I'll be the first president to use a PowerPoint every year. And so now you see why I'm using a PowerPoint deck right now. See, it all came together. To close, I'm not running for president because I dreamt about being president as a kid. Those were not the conversations in my household. Raise your hand if you're a parent like me and Evelyn. If you're a parent, at some point over the last number of years, you've had this sinking feeling that we are leaving our kids a future that is less secure, less stable, less bright than the lives that we have led. And we think about that in terms of climate change, but it's not just climate change. If you were born in the US in the 1940s, there was a 93% chance that you were going to be better off than your parents were. That's the American dream. That's what we all want to live. That's what brought my family here. If you were born in the 1990s in this country, which I can sense as many of you, you are down to a 50-50 shot, and that is declining fast. That is why we parents feel the way we do. Because it's true. We are leaving them a future that is less stable and less secure than the lives that we have led. I'm not running for president because I wanted to be president. I'm running for president because, like so many of you, I'm a parent and a patriot. I have seen the future that lies ahead for our kids. They deserve better, and I want to give them better. But in this, you all are the most powerful voice in our country. It doesn't feel like that. Many of you are just living your lives, deciding to see the presidential candidates as we come through. But I did the math. Do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? 1,000 Californians each. That's right. That's the power each of you have. It's the power to actually transform the course of history. How many of us are here in this room today? I'm going to give a Trumpian estimate. There are about 1,800 people in this room. It's the biggest room anyone's ever seen. There are about 140 people in this room. But 140 would still be almost 4 football stadiums full of Californians worth of power. You all have the power to do something that the rest of the country only dreams of. The rest of our fellow Americans look up and they see our government as a series of pipes that are just clogged full of money, clogged full of lobbyist cash, and they despair they can do nothing about it. They are generally right. They can do nothing about it. Only you can do something about it. It's up to you to flush the pipes clean and retake our government so it starts working for us and not the corporate interests in 20 short days. Thank you very much, Ames. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Let's make history together. Let's fight this out for our kids and win.
Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.